So welcome to so many of you. It's great to see so many faces joining us today for the very first session of the Network Forum in 2022 for the Consortium for Street Children. And the first session today we have is on keeping street-connected children on the agenda, and in particular, General Comment 21. Before we start, we have a couple of items of housekeeping. First and foremost, there will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentations today. And in particular, we have a member, Gonzalo from Carisas Unidos, who will be benefiting from the lovely volunteering translation of Greta. So any questions for Gonzalo would be very much appreciated if they could be put into the chat. And another item on the terms of housekeeping is to please do use the chat box more generally to introduce yourself to other participants, but also to ask any technical questions that you might have. And we are also running the Network Forum sessions on the CSC tag on Twitter. So it's CSC Network Forum 2022. So if you are going to be posting on social media, please do use that hashtag. And also finally, just so you're all aware, the session today is recorded and it will be made available to other network members. So that's something you might want to think about in terms of your participation today. So I just would like to say a few words of introduction before we hand over to our speakers. So General Comment 21, since its creation 5 years ago, has been used in a variety of different ways to shape advocacy and practice for those working with street-connected children. So through national plans, through human rights mechanisms, including the Human Rights Council's UPR procedures, and also through technical guidance to those working in the child rights sector. So today is really an opportunity for us to reflect on those efforts to use General Comment 21 and to explore why General Comment 21 is important, and both to CSE, but also to the network more generally, and to therefore share information on how network members have been using General Comment 21 in their efforts to drive change through policy, advocacy, and practice, and also to hopefully build confidence as well amongst the network on how to use General Comment 21 going forward. So today we'll be hearing from a number of amazing speakers. So we have Catherine Skerry of Bahia Chilean in the Philippines, who was involved in a national plan using General Comment 21, from Gonzalo Salas in Uruguay, who has also been using General Comment 21 for the purpose of the national plan, and also from Rose Kogor of Railway Children, who have used the General Comment 21 as part of UPR recommendations made to the Tanzanian government and helping implement those recommendations. And we'll also be hearing from Catherine Richards, our very own Director of Programs at CSC, who will be talking to us about the implementation of General Comment 21, implementation review of General Comment 21. However, before we move on to those speakers, we'll first hand over to Pia McCrae, the CEO of CSC, who I'm sure you're all aware of, who will talk us through why General Comment 21 is important. So Pia, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. And good very early morning, evening, afternoon, morning to everybody in all the different time zones of everyone who's joining us. It's so brilliant to see all these names I recognize coming up on the screen and faces I recognize. I just wanted to set the context quickly before this brilliant lineup of speakers. And I was going to start, actually, if we can go to the next slide, Ellie, I was going to start with picking up actually on the keynote speech that we had last year from Nigel Cantwell, who gave a keynote speech on alternative care. And he began by setting a little bit of historical context for that presentation, looking, sort of back to early efforts. And I've gone back a bit further than him, thinking about, it's really been 300 years since people have been thinking about street children. There's a picture from London, where I am at the moment, from about 300 years ago. And, in the UK, a foundling hospital was set up in 1739 to look after abandoned children on the streets of London. But in terms of internationally collaborating to respond to street-connected children or children in street situations. That's obviously been much more recently. And with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, from 1989, there was a setting out of what's really quite a radical idea, which is that governments would hold each other to account to respect and protect and promote children's rights. And, there was a rapid recognition of the need to respond to children, like children who are in street situations, who need that additional support, need attention paid to them. And by 1993, I've set out on the screen some of kind of things that come up in international documents. But I think really tellingly, in 1993, the UN General Assembly called for a general comment on children in street situations. Essentially, they were saying, yes, we've got the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but actually for this group of children, there needs to be additional guidance, there needs to be additional clarity about how to monitor government's performance against the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child with respect to children in street situations. And I think it's helpful. Can I have the next slide, Ellie? I think it's helpful just to stop and reflect. I certainly ask myself, why do we look at the world through the lens of children in street situations? Why, we could say, well, we just want to generally improve alternative care, or we want to improve child protection systems, etc. What's the value of using this lens, and why did the Committee on the Rights of the Child choose this lens to frame the general comment? And I've certainly found it really helpful to step back and think about that. And I'm sure, I know how many brilliant people there are on the call today, and people who've thought about this for longer and much more deeply than me. And I'm sure you'll all have super thoughtful answers to this question. But I've sort of come up with three that I think are very important reasons why, an important international committee, the most authoritative committee on the rights of children, chose to do a general comment that reflects children in street situations. For me, is around the causes and consequences of being street connected. It has a hugely profound impact on a child. And we know that the longer street for their survival, the more the experience is likely to impact on their life chances, in spite of the amazing resilience and agency that so many of you talk about in your direct work with children. I think the second reason for me that's really important is that this is a significant and a shared problem across different jurisdictions, across different countries. We've had this whole debate in the sector about numbers and the difficulty of getting sort of global figures. But a conservative estimate, we know we're talking about the tens of millions of children. And while the countries with the highest number of children in street situations are typically countries with significant poverty, that's not the only reason. And we know that that countries which appear to be more developed, which have more resources, also face significant problems and challenges, often much more hidden and not as visible. And then I think the third reason why I think it was so important is about, there is something about that experience of the failure of the adult world, the family community to provide and protect, which doesn't lend itself to simple responses, and the complexity often of trying to disentangle how to give bespoke responses to that shared experience that children have. And in fact, what many of you talk to me about is the fact that well-intentioned responses to the problem of children on the street often have perverse and unintended consequences. And it's something I think we wrestle with in the sector. Could you go on to the next slide, Ellie? So, 5 years ago, certainly that, I wasn't at CSC at the time, but I know my colleagues who were at CSC at the time were really honoured to support the Committee on the Rights of the Child in the development of the guidelines for General Comment 21. which are guidelines for state actors, but I think also importantly guidelines for non-state actors, for civil society organisations, on their responsibilities as duty bearers to children in street situations. And I think it was a milestone because it was a recognition that states have a particular responsibility for this group of children because they're not being provided for by the adults who would normally be able to make sure that their rights were protected, respected and fulfilled. But also a recognition that often mainstream solutions fail to cater for children in street situations. A recent example that really hit me was around legal identity, where there's been brilliant work to bring legal identity systems, birth registration systems into health systems. But when I talked to members of our network, they said, well, the problem is that the children in our network are not part of that system, and so they're falling between the cracks. It was just one of many examples of where a mainstream solution, which is really good, should be put in place, fails to cater for this group of children. And so, you know, because of that recognition, we got 5 years ago that decision to set out specific guidance to children. And I think what we're trying to do today is to see, well, as a result of that, what certainly for folks in our network, what have they been able to do as a result of having that guidance put in place? So back to you, Stephen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pia. It's a super handy introduction to General Comment 21 and why it is so significant in addressing the challenges faced by street-connected children. And so now let's move to Catherine Skerry of Bahay Tulayan in the Philippines, who will talk us through how her organization has been working with General Comment 21 and in assisting street-connected children. So Catherine, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, evening, morning to everybody. Catherine from Bahay Tulayan in the Philippines. So it's really nice to be with you today through this online forum. So I'm just going to share briefly about how we've used, or how the General Comment 21 has been used in the Philippines. So yeah, just before I go into that, I'll just introduce just 2 sentences. Bahay Tulayan is a children's rights organization. We have been working with children in the Philippines for 35 years. And we really started with children in street situations back at the end of the first Marcos regime, when there were many children that started to come to the streets in the capital city of Manila. While our work has broadened since then, children in street situations are still a very much core part of the work that we do. Unfortunately, there is a very high rate of children in street situations across the Philippines in many different urban centres. And like I think many members of the network, we don't have very good ideas of exactly how many that is. The estimates vary hugely. But I'm going to share a little bit about the work and how General Comment 21 has come into the context in the Philippines of what is a very, very long-term, difficult, widespread issue for children. So back so the pictures you'll see in this photo, actually it gives it away. There's a 2021 in this photo, but the work to bring General Comment 21 to children in the Philippines actually started as soon as the General Comment was passed in 2017. And one of the first things, well, one of the early on things that we did with the consortium was develop a Tagalog version of the General Comment, a child-friendly version, which has helped to make it more accessible to children. But we also find adults actually often prefer to use the child-friendly version than the adult version. So we find that's very useful. So the General Comment in the child-friendly version was a key part of one of our projects several years ago, which has been continuing since then, but what we call our Street Children's Congress, which was early on when the General Comment was passed. We brought together children from lots of different organizations to consider the contents, to help them understand the contents of the General Comment and to reflect on it and to see how it related to their own situation. And then we worked with the children and young people to develop outputs, which they used creative forms. So they made film and song and spoken poetry, visual art, to reflect on and to share their experiences that as they connect to the general comment. And those experiences were shared directly with government officials. In the next slide. So I'll just jump to the next slide, in a dialogue which we held on the International Day for Street Children. So this was a chance for them to say, we hear the general comment, it does relate to us, we care about what's in it, and we have recommendations about how it can be implemented in the Philippines. The reason I jumped a slide ahead was, in the meantime, as soon as the general comment was passed, there was efforts to reconvene an interagency national body that had previously been called the National Network on Street Children and had been dormant for many years. But when the general comment came about, it triggered one of the key bodies in the Philippine government, the Council for the Welfare of Children. It triggered them to reconvene this network, and over a period of time, it was institutionalized into what is now called the Subcommittee on Protection and Welfare of Children in Street Situations. And you can see there are lots of logos on this slide. There are 10 national government agencies represented in the subcommittee. And at the moment, there are 6 civil society organizations, Bahay Tulum being one of them. And we're currently the chair of the subcommittee. So we have been since 2019. So this subcommittee came about directly because of the general comment, because there was, I guess, renewed interest, and the national government decided it was time to see what could be done nationally. So I'll just jump back. So what happened then once the subcommittee was set up? So then as I said, these kind of happened at the parallel. So the children from the Street Children's Congress were able to present their reflections on how the general comment, how it related to their own lives. And all of that came together over the next period. So from around about 2018 to 2019, early in 2020, you can see just the pictures that we have here. So we have the general comment, and then combine that with the 4 Steps to Equality campaign of the consortium, which was a way for us to simplify the general comment for the national government. And using the skills that we had from the Advocacy and Action Guide, which was about promoting the rights of children in street situations, plus the input from the children in the Street Children's Congress, all of that came together. And early in the pandemic, we were able to launch through online forum, we were able to launch the first Philippine multi-sectoral strategic plan on children in street situations, so a national plan based very, very closely, very tightly to the general comment. And I've only got a very short amount of time, but I'll just give you a very brief overview of the structure of the plan. So the overall goal is, you can see a very rights-based goal. The goal is that rights of children in street situations are respected, protected, and fulfilled. And the 4 outcomes line up with the 4 steps to equality. And then leading to those, we have 12 outputs, 6 key strategies, and 4 institutional enablers. So you can see there's more detail of that there in the next slide, which I won't go into in detail. Just that outcome 1, it talks about equality for all children. Outcome 2 relates to protecting children from violence. Outcome 3, giving children in street situations access to services. And outcome 4, giving children in street situations access to specialized or customized solutions for their needs. And I think that's just about time up for me. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions later.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Catherine. A really interesting insight into how General Comment 21 can inform national plans, and also ways of going about that as well in terms of child participation, etc. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions that participants might have later down the line. Wonderful. So let's now move to the next speaker. We have Gonzalo Salas in Uruguay, who's also going to talk about how his organization has also been using General Comment 21. So Gonzalo, and with the assistance of Greta, I hand over to you.
Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes a todos. Un placer estar en este conversatorio. Quiero saludar a todos los participantes y principalmente al staff de CSE y a mis compañeros Catherine Rose, que hace varios años tengo el placer de compartir varios foros hablando de el comentario general 21 y hablando de la realidad que viven muchos niños, niñas y adolescentes en situación de calle.
He said it's a pleasure to be here with everybody and just greeting all of you and saying it's been a pleasure to work with you and he's happy to be back here again.
Primero me gustaría hacer una breve, muy breve presentación de lo institucional, de lo que es Gurises Unidos. Gurises Unidos es una NGO, una organización no gubernamental uruguaya, que trabaja desde hace más de 30 años en la defensa de los derechos de niños, niñas y adolescentes, tanto a nivel nacional, como regional, como internacional. Tenemos 3 líneas de trabajo que marcan el accionar de nuestra institución. Uno es el componente de incidencia en política pública, el otro es el componente de atención directa. Ahí trabajamos distintas problemáticas, niños en situación de calle, trabajo infantil, explotación sexual comercial, y la otra tiene que ver con la generación de conocimiento, ese generar conocimiento que tiene como 2 grandes objetivos. El primer objetivo tiene que ver con poder incidir en la política pública, y el segundo otro objetivo es poder generar conocimiento en lo que tiene que ver con metodologías de abordaje que puedan ser replicadas y compartidas, tanto con el Estado como con sociedad civil.
So he's just given a short introduction to Gurises Unidos and their history. They're a Uruguayan civil society organization and have been working for over 30 years, as you can see on the screen, in the defense of children's rights on the national, regional and international level. And he said that they have 3 main action lines that kind of define how they proceed. That's incidents in getting involved in public policy. It's giving attention to children, no matter what their issues may be, such as sexual exploitation, and also generation of knowledge, so that they are able to obviously generate knowledge that from which they can base their interventions in public policy, and also about getting a methodology which they can share their information with other organizations.
Como muchos de ustedes sabrán, Uruguay es país pionero en la implementación del comentario número 21. Esto quiere decir, Uruguay ya hace algunos años se comprometió a incorporar las recomendaciones que el comentario general 21 realiza, y es en función de eso que el Estado asume una serie de responsabilidades en relación a la problemática de los niños en situación de calle, tomando como iniciativa el incorporar estas recomendaciones y el poder armar a partir de esas recomendaciones un plan nacional. ¿Qué habilitó que esto de Uruguay país pionero? Lo primero tiene que ver con un componente de incidencia en política pública. Gurises Unidos es una organización referente en la temática de los niños, niñas y adolescentes en situación de calle, y conjuntamente con el CSI generamos una estrategia de incidencia para que el Estado uruguayo pudiera postularse como Uruguay país pionero o como país pionero en la implementación del comentario general 21. El otro elemento que posibilita que Uruguay fuera país pionero es que en aquel momento el Estado uruguayo y el gobierno uruguayo ve el comentario general 21 y las recomendaciones que de ahí se desprende como la posibilidad de mejorar la política pública y los programas que se venían ejecutando para la atención de los niños en situación de calle. En ese contexto también había otros elementos que favorecían, que era que en Uruguay existe una tradición histórica para el abordaje de los niños en situación de calle, de un trabajo en conjunto entre Estado y sociedad civil. En Uruguay hace más de 30 años que existen programas que cuentan con la financiación del Estado y son implementados por sociedad civil para la atención de los niños en situación de calle. Y es a partir de esa alianza que se ve como muy favorable y muy pertinente poder incorporar las recomendaciones que el Comité de los Derechos del Niño hace en su comentario general 21.
So, as you all will know, Uruguay is a pioneering country in the early implementation of General Comment number 21. Sorry, I just lost where I was for a minute there. So what's made it possible is the fact that Gurisas Unidos is an organisation focused on the issues faced by street children and adolescents. And together they've worked with CSE to influence the state to implement General Comment 21. Gurisas Unidos and the Uruguayan government have seen the introduction of the General Comment as an opportunity to improve public policy towards children in street situations. Gonzalo's also said that what made it possible was that there's a history and a tradition of work and collaboration between the Uruguayan government and CSOs or civil society organizations in this sector, and also that there's been plenty of positive experiences between the state and the CSOs, which made it like a favorable kind of atmosphere in which to kind of influence public policy in this way.
Just Gonzalo, just so you're aware, there's 1 minute left in terms of your contribution, if that's okay. There'll be time at the end for the facilitated discussion, so we can tease out further details from you then as well, just so you're aware.
A mí, entonces, me gustaría ir a slide que son real. Oh, sorry, it's in English, so sorry. Actions developed by Gurisas Unidos. Can we go to the next slide? The other one. Yes. And the other one, please. This one. Thank you very much. I will go iré a los logros generales del proceso de implementación del comentario general. A partir de la implementación del comentario general, hemos logrado un reposicionamiento de la temática en la agenda de la política pública, más allá de que en el Uruguay hubo un cambio de gobierno, se logró, más allá del cambio de gobierno, que este plan continuara vigente y se continuara implementando. A partir de estas acciones se logró que a partir de este plan se logró incorporar la voz de los niños, niñas y adolescentes, la voz también de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil y la voz de las distintas sectoriales del Estado para elaborar un plan integral. Se logró también el fortalecimiento de la red nacional de organizaciones de la sociedad vinculadas a la temática de los niños en situación de calle. Se logró que en lo que fue la emergencia sanitaria de COVID, la población de situación de calle fuera considerada prioritaria y nunca se cerraran los programas de atención a niños en situación de calle, y se logró desarrollar campañas de vacunación para que los niños, niñas y adolescentes en situación de calle fueran los primeros o uno de los primeros en ser vacunados contra COVID. Estos son uno de los grandes logros, o los grandes logros que se vienen obteniendo a partir de la implementación del Plan Nacional.
Just one sec. So just to sum up some of the biggest achievements of what Gurisas Unidos have been able to do with GC21 has been repositioning the issue on the public policy agenda, even despite the change of government, which I believe took place in March 2020. So they were able to continue or keep street children at the top of the agenda from one government to the next. The development of the national plan has been done by incorporating the voice of the children and adolescents themselves, as well as civil society organisations and the different sectors of the government to create this plan. And another big achievement has been the fact that during COVID, none of the attention or the care provided to children, it continued all throughout COVID. And also in the rollout of a vaccine programme, which made sure that children and adolescents were among the first to be vaccinated against COVID-19. So these are what Gonzalo considers to be some of the biggest achievements, and they've been made possible because of the general comment and because of the national plan they were able to put together.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Gonzalo. And hopefully we'll have time during the question and answers section today to discuss perhaps more of the challenges and other aspects of your work with General Comment 21. Wonderful, thank you so much. And now moving in a slightly different perspective in terms of how General Comment 21 can be implemented, to Rose Kogoro of Railway Children in Tanzania to hear their working with General Comment 21 in the context of the Human Rights Council's UPRs. Rose, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, everyone. So I'll also be sharing our experience in engaging with the General Comment number 21 to support or to advocate for the rights of children living and working on the streets in Tanzania. So just quickly, Railway Children Africa, we are a non-governmental organization. We were registered in 2010. And our work mainly focuses on supporting children and youth living and working on the streets in the countries. So our work is based on our new strategy that focuses on 4 action areas. That is protecting vulnerable children that are on the streets and supporting their families, strengthening community responses, strengthening child protection system, and strengthening the evidence. So our experience in engaging with the General Comment number 21 really started in 2018 when we obtained funding from the FCDO to implement a 3-year project that was called Advocating for the Implementation of UN General Comment number 21 to change lives of Tanzanian children. And through this project, we focused on 2 areas, that is direct service delivery and the advocacy work. So quickly on the direct service delivery, what we did was to support the children and the youth on the streets to meet their immediate needs, which include medical support, access to justice, psychosocial support, reintegrating them with their families, but also once we reintegrate, ensuring that they're enrolled into schools. We also supported their families in terms of providing therapeutic sessions, but also we provided economic strengthening in terms of training, but also grants. And we linked the families to the government economic strengthening programs. And with the youth, what we did was, and we continue doing, of course, is providing life skills training that aims at changing their behaviors. But also we supported them to join vocational trainings as well as apprenticeship, and later provided them with startup grants so that they can become self-reliant. So I will focus on the advocacy work we did in relation to the UN General Comment number 21. So the direct service delivery, just to mention, was implemented in collaboration with the 6 implementing partners here in Tanzania: Amani Center, IDC, Caritas, Kisedet, and Chekasana. And the advocacy work was implemented in collaboration with Consortium for Street Children, TLS, that is Tanganyika Law Society, TCRF, and CCR. So what we did was using the General Comment 21, we created awareness, of course, to us as an organization to be able to understand it, but also to the children that we are working with and the young persons. So here we developed child-friendly booklets for the UN General Comment number 21, but also we created awareness to the government officials. The other thing we did is we adapted the indicator manual that has been developed by the Consortium for Street Children to track the progress that Tanzania was making in terms of implementing the UN General Comment number 21. We also analyzed laws, policies, guidelines, and practice to see, to come up or to identify gaps and provide recommendations. So using the General Comment number 21, we worked with the 6 implementing partners to develop a children report, which we used the findings of the analysis we did, but also we used our monitoring data that we are collecting from the work we are doing with the children, and with the implementing partners, and we submitted this report as an experience or showing the progress Tanzania is making in terms of implementing the rights of children working and living on the streets. So we also used the general comment number 21 to engage with the UPR process. And what we did specifically, apart from submitting the alternative report, we also requested for meetings with diplomats of different countries or states in order to lobby them or advocate them to use the recommendations to call for action to the government of Tanzania. We also made an oral statement during the adoption session that we delivered the key recommendations that we wanted the government of Tanzania to accept, but also we drafted a document that we submitted to the TZ ambassador in Geneva. So during the review of Tanzania, our country received 252 recommendations from 92 delegations and accepted 187. Of course, 20 were partially accepted, but also noted 65 recommendations. So to us, the fact that the country was able to accept 187 recommendations, we take it as an achievement because some of those recommendations directly touch the lives of children living and working on the streets, such as ones on education, elimination of violence and discrimination, as well as access to health care. But also we pulled out priority recommendations from the report that Tanzania presented, particularly on the recommendation that the government accepted. So we are going to use those recommendations to advocate or to ensure that the government implements them. And we'll use such as meeting with members of the parliament. We also requested an audience with the Minister of Constitutional and Legal Affairs by then. But unfortunately, immediately after the process, the UPR process, he was changed or removed in the position. We will also continue to raise awareness and advocating, like I said, for the implementation of the recommendation that the government has accepted. But also we will continue to gather evidence that will inform the next cycle of Tanzania review in the UPR process. So some of the challenges we see is that there are a couple of recommendations that directly speak to the lives of children living and working on the street, but the government has not been able to accept them. But also another challenge is the COVID limited really our engagement in the process because most of the engagement we did them virtually, but also there is such limited awareness about the UPR process in the country across the government officials, the media, and the general public as well. Bureaucracy, of course, is also a challenge in terms of securing appointment with top leaders, but also a change of government leaders. Like I said, the minister was immediately changed after the UPR process, and he was the one that delivered the statement. Next, please. So some of the key lessons we have learned is that while advocacy is very important, but it's also important to make sure that we conduct evidence-based advocacy that is done collaborative. And this evidence-based advocacy has to have a shared vision and plan of action, but also simple measures to be able to evaluate the progress we are making and to be clear on who reads when and what, so that we are able to make sure that we implement each action that we put for ourselves. But also it's important to make enough preparations to be able to achieve positive outcomes. Sorry if my time allows. So the other thing we also did is we supported the youth and children to develop what we call youth platforms. And in these platforms, we trained the youth and the children on the general comment number 21, but also we supported them to meet with different government leaders to share their concerns and aspirations in line with the general comment number 21. We also supported the government to conduct headcount survey to count the number of children that are living on the streets in 6 cities across the country. And we did this exercise twice in 2017 as well as in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. That's such a wonderful insight into both the successes and also the challenges of engaging with General Comment 21 as part of the wider human rights infrastructure of the United Nations. I'm sure I have at least some questions that we hopefully be able to follow up on as part of the question and answer session. Handing over now to Catherine Richards, our very own Director of Programs here at CSC, to talk to us a little bit through the review of General Comment 21's implementation. So Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. So as we heard from Pia at the start of the session, the Consortium for Street Children has a rich history with General Comment 21, and we know many of you do too. So 5 years on from its adoption by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, we really want to reflect on how General Comment 21 has been a catalyst for change. So we're launching an implementation review of General Comment 21. We really want to share our learnings from this inquiry to help guide future advocacy and action in the sector. And we're aiming to use the information that we gather through this implementation review. We want to share that information with you all, with members of our network, with our partners, with anybody who's looking to drive change for children in street situations. We want to understand how has General Comment 21 been used to catalyse change or not, where has it also been challenging? What positive change has really occurred, and what can we learn from those who have interacted with it, from those who've used it, including what's been challenging about using it, because we know it's not always easy, but all of those learnings we'd really like to consolidate and think about how that could help guide future advocacy and action in the sector. So just briefly how we're going to go about this implementation review. So in line with problem-based iterative methodologies, we're going to trial, learn and adapt as we go through this review, as we learn, as it unfolds, with an intention to involve more and more people in the review. Our first step will be a very simple survey. It's an engagement survey, which we'll be sharing with all of our network members in the next couple of weeks, and possibly more broadly. We're open to inputs from, as I say, anybody who's looking to drive change for children in street situations. The aim of the survey is to understand what organisations and individuals in the sector what they understand about General Comment 21, how they're using General Comment 21, and whether they believe it's useful, whether they've used it to be integrated into their strategies and plans, and whether they've progressed the recommendations within General Comment 21. After the survey, our second step will be to dive deeper with those who have engaged with General Comment 21, through focus group discussions and interviews and the development of case studies. The main thing we want to amplify through the outcomes of the research is what's been working well and how it's been achieved. But as I say, in order to understand that, we really need to understand what's been challenging through the use of General Comment 21 as well. This will really help us understand what will be useful for us all as a network to further the implementation of General Comment 21. So we'll begin with sharing the survey with you all in the next few weeks. So please look out for it coming into your inboxes very soon. It will be likely shared through our network bulletin, but we'll also be following up with different people through calls that we have with you to remind you to maybe complete it. So please do look out for that and fill out the survey. Whether this is the first time you've heard of General Comment 21, or whether it's something you interact with on a daily basis, every response is really important to us. And the survey will take no longer than 5 minutes to complete. So we'd really, really value your contribution to this implementation review. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you to all 4 of our speakers today for some really wonderful inputs. into General Comment 21 and its implementation. So now we have time for questions and discussion, and I would just like to, I suppose, frame the discussion by perhaps discussing how General Comment 21, whilst it can be explicitly referred to in efforts to implement, there are also efforts that are perhaps less directly referential to General Comment 21. And I'm thinking of challenges, for example, in Bangladesh to legal identity rights for street-connected children looking to partake in the Street Child World Cup. So perhaps as part of the discussion, those different ways of ensuring that the rights enshrined in General Comment 21 are realized can inform our discussion as well, because it's not just those efforts that make explicit reference to General Comment 21 that are important. It's all the efforts that work within efforts to achieve child rights. So I suppose perhaps I'll open the floor to questions for our speakers at this stage. But if there aren't any questions yet, perhaps we can start by talking about a challenge I think that's cropped up in all three of our participants' contributions, which is how it is that we can work with a government, in particular, a government that often changes. So when administrations change, I wonder if Rose, Gonzalo, or Catherine, you'd like to speak about how these particular sets of challenges in implementing national plans or working within UPR recommendations, how you have come across those sorts of challenges.
I'm happy to respond to that. Thank you for the question. I think that's a very, very real challenge for us, but it's where having a national plan is so important. So for those who know the political situation in the Philippines, it's pretty difficult. It has been for quite some time now. But actually, just even in the last 2 months, we've really had to battle with that issue, because we've had a change of government in the middle of the year, and the new Secretary of Department of Social Welfare and Development, suddenly announced that he was going to rescue all the children off the street and keep them in institutional care till they were 18, basically. He was proposing what he called a 3-strike policy. And so that was pretty devastating for us, because we kind of were in these long processes to develop the national plan and then to translate it into local action plans. And there's been so much work that has been going on for such a long period of time, and then it felt like just somebody could come in and just wipe the slate clean. But the fact that we had the national plan gave us something to push back with. So I don't feel like we're there yet. I don't think we've completely eliminated the threat that this new government presents, but they have definitely backed down. So they were planning to implement these massive, what they called massive reach outs beginning in October, and it's now November, and they haven't. They've really pulled back on that, because we came back to them and said, this is the plan that you yourselves developed, sponsored, signed up to. On one hand, you're sitting in a committee that is trying to implement this plan. On the other hand, you're proposing something that's completely opposite. So it really is for us, and I think I saw that in Gonzalo's presentation, where he said that consistency, having something that stays there even when the administration changes, even if they don't always implement it the way we want them to implement it, it gives them something that they've signed on to, which is really, really important. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. And yes, so Gonzalo, over to you.
Yes. Yo creo que el gran aporte y el gran desafío que tuvo la implementación del plan fue que le permitió al Uruguay tener una política pública y un programa dirigido a niños en situación de calle que trasciende un gobierno, generar un plan. A partir del desarrollo de este plan nos permitió hacer política pública de una manera distinta a la que en Uruguay y en América Latina estamos acostumbrados, que es hacer política pública incorporando la voz de los beneficiarios para el desarrollo de la política pública, en este caso, los niños en situación de calle, incorporar la voz de la sociedad civil y poder pensar una política integral integrando las distintas sectoriales.
Hang on a second, just writing that down. So he said that the biggest challenge to the national plan is just the fact that governments can change and throw out everything that you've had in your former one. But the GC21 has allowed Uruguay to have a policy that transcends whatever government is there at the time. And it's allowed them to make public policy in a different way to what Gonzalo says is what they're used to doing in Latin America, which is that the policy incorporates the voice of los beneficiarios, so those who benefit from the plan, which in this case are the children themselves. And also it's allowed the voice of civil society organizations to participate and in general just create an integral policy that transcends different sectors as well as just the charity sector.
So if I can chip into that, Stephen, as well. So for our case, I think what we find useful is to build the capacity and relationship of the technical staff, not necessarily the top leaders, the big guys like the ministers, because even if the ministers or the top leaders change, at least the technical staff have the understanding on what we were working with. But the other thing is having memorandum of understandings with the institutions. So that way we document whatever we agree to work on. And even if the leader changes, at least we have a binding document to the both parties. And the other thing is building the capacity of the beneficiaries, so the children and the youth, to be able to advocate for their own rights, or to speak up for their own rights. I think that is also a way of ensuring, even if the administration changes, at least what we are working on doesn't change or progress.
Yeah, those are all really amazing examples of action that can transcend a particular administration and which can ensure that General Comment 21 is implemented beyond change of government. I wonder, does anyone else have anything they'd like to share in terms of their work implementing General Comment 21 and the challenges associated with that?
So for our case, I think one of the challenges also we experienced was, so usually there's a protocol on how the UN documents come in the country. And so when we were following up about the UN General Comment number 21 with the ministry that is responsible for children, they told us they had not received the document. And so we have to follow up with the Ministry of External Affairs. And then when we did, they also said they had not received the document from their representative, the UN representative in Geneva. And so it was a roller coaster, somehow difficult to find out what is going on within the government. And they say, this is not something you as an NGO can, tell the government that needs to do. This is something that happens within the government systems. So by the time we were finishing the project, the document had yet not arrived in the country. And to this moment, we still struggle in terms of how do we make sure that the ministry that is responsible gets the document. Yeah.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you, Rose. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to contribute? We're
There's a
reaching
question in the chat, Stephen.
Oh, is there? Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah.
Hi.
I'm reading out for us.
Hi, Stephen. This is Meindert from Tanzania, Amani Center for Street Children. Are you able to hear me? Because I get a message.
Hello,
that
yes. Go ahead.
Okay, so my internet's not great, but I'll try and get the message across. I also put a question in the chat box. So we were engaged also with Railway Children and the consortium in this whole Tanzanian lobby work. But one of the challenges I see as sort of grassroots service delivery organizations, which Amani is, directly working with street children, is that a lot of that work at the national or even international United Nations level seems far away from the actual day-to-day practice. So one of my big interests, and I think as organization as well, is what could we do with the general comment to really take it down to the frontline staff who work directly with street children, and to give it hands and feet there, so that it's not we're all trying to move things from the top down, but that we do a lot more of from the bottom up. And I've heard a few examples in your presentations, and I know, of course, Rose and Railway Children, that we collaborated on some of that, but I would love to hear some tips, keeping in mind that most of the service delivery organizations have little experience in advocacy, have very little time for it. So what would be your sort of top 3 definitely do or definitely don't sort of tips if you want to take some of this forward with very limited time, even maybe at the local level and not so much the national level, as a grassroots service delivery organization working with street connected children?
Yeah, so Maindut's question, how are there any ways that we can suggest to ensure that General Comment 21 remains relevant for street connected children, and in particular those organizations working on the ground? You know, how do we sort of translate it from the UN level to the local level? I wonder if anyone's got any rather quick responses to give now. I mean, otherwise, I'm sure we can arrange for those responses to get back to Maindut after the session today. But just to see if anyone's got any brief notes they'd like to give now.
I would just say, I put a note in the comment in the chat box, but I think especially for us, for working with local governments, we need to give them examples of what they can do, because like, especially in our context, their go-to response is always just to remove children from the street. And when we tell them not to do that, they're like, well, what are we supposed to do? So I think what we're really looking for in developing a localization manual for our national plan, which is based heavily on GC21, is what are some alternatives? What can they do that is rights-based, that lines up with the GC21, and giving them a menu of options? Because what the LGUs, the local government units, keep telling us is we've got our own authority. We'll do what we want to do. It's our mandate. You know, we won't be told we don't want to have to do it the same way the national government does it. So they want to have a sense of autonomy, but we need to give them the tools that show them in a logical framework about why this is the right intervention, and why you can't do just one thing. You need to do, you need to have a holistic set of services. You can't expect with one intervention, in the space of 3 months, that you're going to solve the problem. So I think giving them as simple as possible. We really need to, and even if you're passionate about it, it's hard to read. I think I'm losing connection, but thank you.
That's really wonderful. Thank you, Catherine. Some really practical examples there of how to translate General Comment 21 from the UN to the local level. And thank you all so much for today for your input. I think it's really great to see that General Comment 21 is being kept alive by all of your efforts and ways that will continue into the future. We are running short on time, so this is the end of the session, I'm afraid. I would just like to thank all of the speakers for your contributions today. Really, really interesting. And also a special thank you as well to Greta, who's a volunteer interpreter today, who's used her time to assist Gonzalo in contributing to the session. Pia, I wonder if you had anything that you'd like to say at this stage.
Yeah, I sort of think that in a way, we're getting to the meat of it at the end of the conversation, aren't we? How can we translate this down to all the people who work in your organizations? How can we bring the conversation down to practical options, as Catherine put it, for policymakers, not just at the national level, and certainly not at the international level, but often at the municipal or subnational level. And I think that's what we want to get out of this review. So I'd really encourage you to participate. National plans is great, but that's only going to be a handful of countries who do that. And I think we're going to get a lot of progress by people making small, specific focus changes that really make a difference at those maybe lower, more local levels. So we're really looking forward to working with you on that under the umbrella of General Comment 21. But as Stephen said at the beginning, it won't always even need to make reference to General Comment 21 when you're working with somebody in a municipal government. I just want to thank everybody. It's been such a brilliant conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. And what a great way to start the Network Forum. So thank you all.